Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, show about hot takes under the not tasty pancakes, where we're talking about a movie you for sure don't want to skip. Chris, you throw me the idol and whoosh, I'll throw you the whip. Eyebrow movements. If this is your first time on the show, well,
that was wonderful.
Thank you.
That's a great one.
Welcome to Pop-O-Holics. This is the show that, it's kind of a mess, but it's fun. It's a fun mess where we talk about all sorts of things. We have our weekly uploads, which are episodes that we catch up on the latest going-ons in pop culture and what we're consuming. And then we have these main topic episodes. I'm your host with the most, Christian Katie. And I'm joined, as always, by two gentlemen that I have such respect for, and I would never tarnish their names, and I just really appreciate their being on the show.
Chris Conkling.
Your time is up, Dr. Jones. Brian Dupree.
Is that your catchphrase?
Is he a doctor?
He is. He is a doctor. Brian is itching, in fact, to cancel Dr. Indiana Jones, and we'll talk about it more.
He's done for.
We'll get into it. So what are we talking about? We're hinting at it. We're springing into Spielberg summer, as you correctly put, Chris, previously on the show. And it's the best way that you could possibly describe this month, in my opinion. And we're talking about all things Steven Spielberg. And by all things, I mean like a very small snippet of his overall works.
Like the beginning of his filmography.
Yeah, we talked
basically.
about what was it? Close Encounters of the Third Kind last week. That was a fun conversation. Fucking aliens. It's my first time seeing that picture, and then we also talked about one of his first major motion pictures, his second actually, Jaws, his first big blockbuster. Some would say a perfect blockbuster, but I think more accurately, it is a perfect film that we discussed. So this week brings us.
Did you make a 180 on that?
He flipped?
What? No, that's the viewpoint that I've always had. So we are now coming to one of his most famous works. We are talking about the OG Indiana Jones. We are talking about Indiana Jones, also known as Raiders of the Lost Ark.
For nearly 3,000 years, man has searched for the Lost Ark of the Covenant.
The Bible speaks of the Ark leveling mountains and laying waste to entire regions. Not something to be taken lightly. No one knows its secrets.
Jones, do you realize what the Ark is? It's a transmitter. It's a radio for speaking to God.
An army which carries the Ark before it is invincible.
The Ark, if it is their Adonis, then it is something that man was not meant to disturb.
It is protected by forces beyond.
That is from the trailer of Raiders of the Lost Ark, also titled Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think. I think it has kind of two titles. But this film came out in 1981. It is directed by the Steven Spielberg. It is written by Lawrence Kasdan, based on a story by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman, with a score by John Williams. Budget of $20 million. It grossed $390 million. Certified hit. And it stars, of course, Harrison Ford as the titular and sometimes not titular Indiana Jones, with Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood, Paul Freeman as Rene Belloq, Ronald Nacey as Major Arnold Toht, John Rhys-Davies as Sallah, Denholm Elliott as Marcus Brody, and many more. What are we going to be talking about? Well,
do you mind if I pause just while we're mentioning the cast here? Did you guys realize that that Sallah is Gimli from Lord of the Rings? John Rhys-Davies also plays Gimli in Lord of the Rings.
No, but that makes so much sense, and I'll talk about his voice is incredible. He's
a great voice.
I want to capture his voice in a bottle. He's like, Indiana Jones. So good. That is Gimli. How did I not know? I should have, because Gimli has.
Wow.
Yeah. Very good call out. So what are we going to be talking about other than, reminiscing about where other actors were and weren't? We're going to be discussing non-spoiler thoughts first. I don't know why we're doing this for this episode. We do it just out of consistency's sake, and we want to be consistent to our listeners. There will be a non-spoiler.
Yeah, for our listeners that are of Gen Z and probably haven't seen this movie.
All of
our respectful
Gen Z listeners. So many of them we have. And also just the format of our show. It works best. So we'll do a non-spoiler discussion about our history with Indiana Jones as a character, as a series, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then we'll talk about our overall non-spoiler opinions on the film. And then we'll dive into spoilers and talk about what themes there are, maybe that aren't, and what our favorite moments are, and how does this compare with the other films, Jaws and Close Encounters, that we've talked about. And then I'll wrap up with final thoughts. So let's dive right into it. Chris, I want to hear your history with Indiana Jones films and Raiders of the Lost Ark specifically.
So Raiders of the Lost Ark came out 7 years before I was born. So Indiana Jones as a franchise was already well in the popular zeitgeist by the time I came onto this earth. So growing up, I always saw, bits and pieces of Raiders of the Lost Ark on television. I watched a little bit at a friend's house when I was in pre-K and kindergarten. I had seen enough of Indiana Jones to then go out onto the playground and pretend to be Indiana Jones, with the whip and running from giant boulders and trying to investigate temples and stuff like that. But it really wasn't until high school where I gave the franchise its dues. So the first time I saw Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade was actually probably when I was 15 years old. But yeah, at that point I was already very invested in film. I thought that it was a blind spot in my film knowledge. But yeah, I love this franchise. This is a staple in my household.
Chris, you're missing a film in the series that you didn't mention.
Oh yeah, and then I saw Temple of the Crystal Skull in theaters.
I think it's once. Kingdom.
Yeah, Kingdom. Who cares?
He's erased it from his memory.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I saw it in theaters. Who cares?
Interesting. Brian, your history with Dr. Jones. Sexy PhD. Dr. Jones.
So I was first introduced to Raiders by my dad. So I saw this very young. I've probably seen this movie at least 10 times, probably more.
Can we pause for a second? I'm sorry to interrupt. This movie is... I don't think little kids should watch this movie. It's very violent. There's some terrifying imagery.
Super violent.
That it's pretty creepy. So it's pretty crazy that our parents are yeah, this is fine. It's terrifying, some of this shit.
But I feel like that was normal for the era.
Maybe. I don't know. They didn't let me watch a lot of other shit that was, I don't know, less spooky and terrifying than this. There's straight up horrifying things that happen in this film.
Think about it this way, Christian.
Well, we're not going to spoil it, but
Indiana Jones Temple of Doom is responsible for the PG-13 rating. Prior to that movie coming out, there was no PG-13 rating.
Okay, I talked about this a week or two ago.
Yeah, with Jaws being rated PG.
Yeah, and Temple of Doom causing me nightmares. I freaked out when my dad showed me that movie, and because of it, I'm realizing now that I may never have seen The Last Crusade. I'm not. I feel like I must have, but I really want to come back and rewatch both of those now, having come back to Raiders. But yeah, I grew up with Raiders and was able to see the stunt show that was at Disney. That was super interesting as well. And yeah, so I kind of grew up with Indiana Jones being very, very known in my house.
Very cool. Yeah, I like you, was it was a movie that my dad really liked. Out of all these big Hollywood movies, this is a straightforward, classical Hollywood film in so many ways. And it's just such a easy thing for a dad to watch with his son. So yeah, I saw it very similarly. We had it on VHS, so I watched this movie all the time. It was actually probably the first Steven Spielberg movie I saw, because I saw it before Jurassic Park, I'm sure, because I know that we had it before. So I've seen it a lot and never saw, and to this day have not seen Temple of Doom all the way through. I've seen parts of it. Really? But I have not seen Temple of Doom all the way through. I was always told that was the worst one. And I've seen Last Crusade a couple times because we might have owned that or we rented it a bunch. And I really like that as well. And so I'm very fond. I did see Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, and everybody knows that movie's not very good. But I've only seen that movie once. I did, for this viewing, buy the 4-pack. It's actually 5 discs because one's bonus features. Blu-ray, which I've dived into a little bit. and I watched the film on it, and it's probably it's the one that's not 4K. I bought the 4K Jaws and the 4K Close Encounters. Excuse me. I bought the 4K Close Encounters and Jaws, but this is the Blu-ray because Chris, you had informed us the 4K actually comes out very soon. As of this recording, it should be out in like a month. But I didn't care. I was that concerned. And this transfer looks the best and has the best sound design of any of them. Because I think in the 80s, you got the very important thing that I noticed is when this film started, guess what logo appears? That is very...
Paramount.
No. Well, right? Yes, of course. But THX. Oh. Which reminded me, oh yeah, this was the standard that Lucas had tried to, had successfully actually implemented into theater chains for a better sound system, and I guess I should be thanking George Lucas for this. The sound mixing is noticeably much, much cleaner and better. I mean, it's full surround sound, and it's awesome. And the transfer looks beautiful. Like the shots in the desert are amazing. So, highly recommend. It's good, and they have all the bonus features. A lot of the bonus features are recycled. So there's an on-set featurette. And then they have the making of, which uses a lot of footage from the onset. So I'd say skip the onset, just watch the making of from 1981 because they just used the same exact footage. So that's a learn that I had. But it's cool because it's all there and they have the making of, I think, each film and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. So,
Christian, I have a question for you in regards to our mutual personal history. Do you remember watching the making of Indiana Jones in film school?
No, not.
Same teacher were always mentioning, this is another making of documentary that he really liked. And I remember watching this in his class.
It's very possible. Obviously, the one that sticks out is Blade Runner and the Man from El Mancha or whatever it is, the one about the Terry Gilliam film, Don Quixote. Those are the two that...
Oh, Man from La Mancha.
La Mancha, thank you. Those are the ones that stick out from film class, but it's very possible that we definitely watched this. But I wasn't watching going oh, yeah, I remember this, but it could have been. I don't know. I was really high a lot in those days, so it's hard for me to remember. So sorry.
Understandable.
So high. Anyway, don't smoke weed if you are in school, and it hinders your ability to remember the documentaries you watch for your film class. Anyway, that's sidebar. Smoke if you got them, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, this isn't a podcast about weed. So let's talk about our overall opinions of this rewatch and kind of revisiting this film classic that I think everybody can agree is a classic Spielberg film and a classic adventure film. What were our thoughts on our rewatch? Brian, let's start with you.
Have you guys ever heard of a little composer named John Williams? Because this man... It's hard to imagine Steven Spielberg existing without him. Every time it's just okay, so this is a completely they're so integral to my feelings and the emotions of every one of the movies that he scores. And I will say there's some stuff that reminded me, there was a romantic / brooding theme that reminded me of something from Star Wars.
There's a recycling a little bit of Leia's theme.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
from
I
Star
knew it was
Wars.
something.
All right, Chris, I'm glad you brought up the word recycling. Because when it comes to John Williams' score, listening to
sampling himself,
it almost feels like
he does. He'll recycle
parody of himself. Even the tense moments of action set pieces, there's kind of a car chase, which is very well done. We'll talk about it in our favorite moments and all that. But the theme that's playing there is just totally Empire's Bad theme of generic dun,
yeah,
dun, dun,
yeah.
dun, 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 and it's just oh yeah, you're John Williams. Yeah, this is the most John Williams ass score I've ever heard. But then you get to the main theme and you're this is just timeless and classic, right? And so he's killing it with the hits.
Exactly.
When he brings
when it comes to the main themes of the film,
no one makes a main theme like Mr. J.
At least he's original with those.
Yeah,
he just pays homage to himself in some of the other pieces.
So it's hard to not get swept up in it. But the movie is nonstop action from the word go. You've got incredible set pieces, great action choreography, awesome stunts throughout. Everything just looks amazing. It's visually, I think, one of the strongest Spielberg movies we've watched so far. you can, and I have watched this movie without the dialogue on. And I think you can understand pretty much everything that you need to about what's going on without any of the dialogue. And with that being said, this movie is consistently really funny, like quippy dialogue, fun banter between the characters, and just kind of silly things. And what always kind of surprises me about Indiana Jones, as much of a badass as he kind of is, he's also kind of a dweeb. He's like kind of bullied around by other people and not the best fighter.
Kind of a klutz.
Yeah, kind of klutzy, scrappy, and kind of relatable in that way, as not being completely overpowered. But yeah, this movie, like you guys mentioned, is a love letter to these old serialized TV dramas like Zorro and things like that. And it takes it to the blockbuster level and just delivers on every level there. We kind of talked about it off mic. There's not much to work with thematically here, but the movie is so much fun that it doesn't really matter. You get swept up in what's happening plot-wise, and it carries through without needing to have all that much more there.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, I completely agree, Brian. You took the words right out of my mouth. Like what Spielberg and Lucas are trying to do
put
here
him
is
back!
they're trying to recreate... they're trying to recreate those serials from back in the day. And I think you put it so perfectly, is like, adapt those serials to the blockbuster. Right? Like just up the scale, basically. And that's what's so much fun about this movie, is that it's a very simplistic action film, but that sense of wonder that we've talked about with both Jaws and Close Encounters, there's a sense of adventure here that Spielberg's able to maintain throughout his entire early filmography. One of my favorite things, Brian, is you said that you think you could watch this movie without the dialogue and still understand what's going on. The script for Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark is so perfectly crafted.
15 pages.
We learn...
Sorry.
They did it with 15. It was a clean
just
15
Indiana
pages.
Jones's name being said.
What I really appreciate about this movie is that we learn everything we need to learn about Indiana Jones in the first 5 to 10 minutes of the film, and he doesn't say anything.
Everything we need to know and everything there is to know.
Really, to be honest, like we understand the core of who this person is before he says a single word, and I just think that's brilliant. And it makes this movie so easily digestible because it's easy to understand. But I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Wow. Damn. Laying it down. Oh, man. Do I have to be the heel for the Indiana Jones episode?
Brian and I still have some shit to talk about later on in spoilers, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I felt, I appreciated a lot of stuff. And I got to say, by like halfway point, I'm in it. I'm having a great time. Blu-ray looks great. I'm like having all sorts of nostalgia because I like love this movie just by proxy of my childhood. It's like great. It's not my favorite movie ever though. It's like I might be a little overrated. I think it's okay. I think it's fine. I think the stuff that's good, we're definitely gonna talk about it. I just think it's like there's not that much, like you were saying, Brian. It's like you don't need much there because it's just so fun. And yeah, like I think all the fun stuff, but I think as there are better like action and adventure movies, it's like if I was
but it's Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is so charismatic.
He's not really. He's fine. He's fine. He's fine. But like, I recently watched Alita Battle Angel, and for my like popcorn fun, like if I was a kid,
don't you dare.
Like that movie is just better at doing the spectacle thing. Like this is doing the spectacle thing the best the 1980s has to offer. Right? There's an inherent limitation. Like some of this stuff looks cheesy. Some of it looks great, and the practical stuff is like really cool. But at the end of the day, because there's not much there, it's just relying on spectacle, which is a lot of good, like, actual stunts done by Harrison Ford himself. Some of it kind of wasted that Harrison Ford did it because you can't see him that well. And I'm like, oh, that's a stunt double. And then I watched the special features, was like, oh, it's actually Harrison Ford. Well, they wasted that because I don't even see his face, which is kind of shitty for Harrison Ford. But
at least he can say that he did it, though. I mean,
sure,
at the
who
very
doesn't?
least.
He almost got his nuts ran over by a wheel. That was the scene that was like, ugh, bleed. So there's lots of love. There's lots of love here. And I'm only shitting on it because someone has to shit on it. But I have to say, Alita Battle Angel, I'd rather watch that again than Indiana Jones. I think that for a fun ride that's like new and interesting, like that's doing that really well. And it actually has, I think, more heart than this movie. and because there's just not a lot. Now, what I will say is, I have the set now. I want to watch Temple of Doom for the first time, and I'm very interested in doing that. I'm like excited about diving into that. I want to rewatch Last Crusade because I remember that being my favorite one, and I do think like from my memory, which is totally flawed because it's been over 10 years since I've seen it. Like the father-son dynamic fleshes out Indiana Jones' arc and his motivations as who he is and what his purpose is, and like that stuff is more at the forefront. You get Sean Connery, R.I.P. Like you get him in a performance, and I think you get a lot of the same action adventure. I think most importantly, as we'll talk about in spoilers, I think the ending makes more sense. This film has a big problem with like what the like. I honestly, I've seen this movie a million times. I watched it as an adult, and I was like, "What the fuck is what?" Like, there's so many whats that I have of like, what? I don't know. I feel like it ties in better. I remember thematically, and I could be off base. I need to rewatch Last Crusade, and if I was a better podcast host, I would have already done that before the recording of our Indiana Jones episode. But I remember very clearly what the finale happens in Last Crusade and what that means to both our characters and what they're looking for. And I'm like, that is so compelling. There's a spectral element to this one, but I don't think it adds up to much more than the sum of its parts, which is
I want to say this movie is really silly on some levels. And I don't know if we've said that.
It's supposed to be.
But no, that's the thing. So it's like, I think it doesn't take itself seriously. So there's moments where, Christian, I agree, where you're just like, wait, what just happened? Did our character just hold his breath for like across half a continent of ocean?
We'll talk about
that.
it.
That may have just happened.
I didn't even think of that.
But
I did think.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll talk. Well, because I reasoned it.
You're totally spot on with I think those qualms.
Yeah. So I think
I have to I can't pinpoint exactly what elements you're talking about, so I'm excited to get into spoilers so you can elaborate on them a little bit. But I have to say, one of my favorite things about these films is that 95% of them are grounded in reality, and then all of a sudden there's a supernatural turn once they get to
which is fine.
Whatever it is,
and I think they build up
for.
to it. It's just that supernatural turn.
It's literally in every single one.
But I think I think it's rewarded better story wise in at least what I can say, The Last Crusade, which I think it just it's a little more compelling there to me. But we'll talk about all that in spoilers. But those are our general thoughts. I still love this movie, of course. It's Indiana Jones, right? And I think because
how dare you say Alita Battle Angel's better than this film?
I didn't say it was better. I just said for a movie that's just like a fun romp, I think there's just a little more there, and it's super fun. This movie, like, I think falls apart on the fact that there is, as we'll talk about themes, which we're going to, like, literally, like, we have a plan. When we start talking about these, me and Brian are going to take a shot for inspiration, I think. Because, I think we're going to be at a loss for words. Because this movie's about just being a fun spectacle. I mean, like, you watch the making of, and Spielberg's like, we don't have time to like nail these scenes down. I want to like execute this shit. This is a blockbuster, baby. We're sending this out the door. And I think he executes well. And so much of this can be said about like just the machine that is George Lucas and Spielberg's production team just being so like, to this day, I don't think anybody's doing it like they are. Of like maybe Marvel in their conjunction with the 18 3D animation effects houses that they have, that machine that's running, that's impressive. This, as far as a practical, artistic scale kind of thing, is like, it's unparalleled.
Over like 3 continents.
So crazy.
Yeah,
the logistics. I mean,
continents.
Listen, Spielberg, he does logistics. I think that's like the greatest thing that can be said of like just they shot this thing in like 60 days.
9,000 snakes.
60 days. Oh my God. Yeah, we'll get to it. There's a lot of cool things.
The planning for that is so insane.
Right. But for what? For this professor who is
Wait, now you're talking about it like it's B-movie schlock. For what? What who cares about this dumbass Raiders?
I kind of am. I think it's the great B-movie.
Okay.
Well,
I think it is that.
Yeah,
though.
I think it's the best version of like a B-movie for sure. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah,
that's what it's supposed to be.
So it's doing it. Yeah. No, for sure. I'm not saying like nothing is worth doing. I'm just saying this movie's fucking.
Christian Cady, Raiders lives up to a low bar.
It's not, I'll have to watch Last Crusade. Maybe my tune will change, and Temple of Doom as well. But it's not my favorite in the series. Despite it, I've definitely seen this one the most. I've seen this one the most, and I just don't think. If I were to see this as an adult, like now, this is my first time watching Raiders, I would have been appreciative of all the logistics stuff. But I think I would have been like somewhat like, really, this is like everybody loves this movie like a lot. Like I think it's okay, but
let me ask you this: when I rewatched Inception way back, I got big Raiders vibes from it. Did you guys get any Inception vibes watching Raiders? I feel like there are kind of call outs like the Marrakesh bit. Like Inception is the same thing when we meet Tom Hardy. I may be reaching here, but the vibe of the movies feels very similar to me in their just world hopping, giant spectacle, bringing a team together. But
I think it's very specific for you. But I see the groundwork there.
Yeah, probably.
I see the dots. You're not crazy. But no. Not one time did I think of even Chris Nolan.
Yeah, I definitely didn't piece together.
Sure.
I thought of Tom Cruise. That's what I thought of. I thought of like Mission Impossible in a way.
Tom Cruise doing his own stunts.
I thought about more of like the kind of action movies that Tom Cruise would do starting in like the late 80s. So it's definitely like, just a clearer line. Well, we have Chris Nolan on the call, and he can tell us about what he thinks.
I'm sorry.
Indiana Jones is great. This is Michael Caine, actually. And you, sir, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are the only two that could possibly make this happen. All right, we're off the rails. Let's get into spoilers with Raiders of the Lost Ark starting now.
Before we go any further, just a silly personal anecdote that I want to share, because you've mentioned Temple of Doom a couple times now, Christian. I know we're not talking about Temple of Doom, but I had seen Temple of Doom probably 2 or 3 times prior to this realization, but it took me up until 5 years ago to realize that Temple of Doom is a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's not a sequel.
Yeah.
It takes place prior to Raiders. And then The Last Crusade is actually the sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Did you guys know that?
I'm not sure I knew that either. Yeah.
It blew my mind when I found out. Because like I always thought it was a weird place for Indy to be in Temple of Doom after Raiders. You know? Like meeting a new girl, like being on a different continent and stuff. Like what happened to Marion. But it's all a younger Indy in that film, which is crazy.
George Lucas and his timelines, huh?
Right. Sidebar, done. Spoiler time. Indiana Jones didn't hold his breath in a submarine.
Are you sure?
I think so. It seems that way because he's soaking wet.
He rode it through the ocean. Yes.
It seems that way, Brian, because he's soaking wet. But I think if you think about it, he probably jumped off the sub into the water when it resurfaced, and then had to climb, on deck prior to all the Nazis getting out of it.
No.
That's what Chris, I took away this time around. But there have been many viewings
for a reason. He held his breath. He's a champion.
There have been many viewings prior to this one where I'm like, did that man hold his fucking breath this whole way?
Let's just make whenever that theme plays, he's invincible. I don't know if you know this. I'm gonna blow up the Ark. Anyway, what are
he has plot armor.
What are the themes of Indiana? Before we start this, Brian, I believe we have a special. What's the word that our main Karen Allen says? And I think I will definitively say the best scene in the movie and one of my favorite scenes of all time. And I will revisit it for all time's sake. I know I'm skipping ahead to like favorite moments, but the showdown is a great short film that's just in the middle of this movie, and it is a perfect 3-act play of a moment that is so good. So in reference to that, what does she say? She says like she's like Pitriar or something like that. I don't know. Do you remember? Nope. Just total. Yeah, she said.
I'm so sorry. No,
I think she says wait or whatever it is in Mongolian or she's.
Because she takes the one. Yeah, they think she's done.
Yeah, she's in Nepal. I don't know what this Nepalese.
No idea.
Anyway, watching this scene my nipples were definitely on high alert. Anyway, Brian, let's take a shot.
Oh, Lord. Cheers.
Oh, that was a big boy.
Had to get that. Oh, God.
Ugh.
Had to get that place down. That good set down. I thought she was going to break that glass. It was a powerful. Christian has fallen over out of his chair.
Whew. Oh, yeah. That is okay.
That's going to be it for me, guys.
That is okay tequila. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, what are the themes of this?
All right, themes. Archaeology is the shit and history is cool.
And sexy.
This sexy as shit.
What is up with the beginning of this movie where he's like, he's back and he's like, I'm talking about the old ruins of this, that, and the other. And the girls in the class, literally on her eyelids, it just says like, I want to fuck you. Like on her eyelids.
Let's get to it. All right.
It says love you or something. I love that the classroom is mostly girls and then one dude.
And there's a deleted scene that's like, thank God this isn't in the final cut. There's a scene of he's talking to
the orangutan.
Not the orangutan. He's talking to the dude that runs I guess he's high up in the org of the institution and like funds a lot of his grave digging.
Marcus?
Yeah, Marcus. And he runs into a student and the student's like, oh, we were supposed to have a private meeting. And Indy's like, oh, yes, I just have to discuss this, but my office is open at 5 o'clock later today. And she's like, okay, I look really forward to seeing you. And it's like, this moment, like,
wow.
Like he might be banging a bunch of these students. It's very...
He's a bit of a womanizer. A bit of a James Bond type.
But he's also, okay, let's just say it here. Within the context of the movie, he had some sort of relationship, seemingly sexual, with Marion when she was 15 years old, which is why he's on the outs with his mentor. And
when is it discussed?
This is what I was bringing up
When do we discover
earlier.
that she was like super young?
See, so this is something
Brian
that's
and
not
I had
in
to
the
do
context
some
of the movie.
research.
This is something that is stated in the fandom.
This is maths that are done based on...
Yeah, because she's supposed to be 25 in the movie.
Okay.
And he is 37, I believe. So, yeah, they have a relationship when she's 15. And so he's probably definitely sleeping with the students, which is already screwed up. But he may also be a sex offender, like child predator. So this is why I'm putting it out on Twitter. Indiana Jones is canceled. He's done.
My counter argument off the air for Brian earlier
you shouldn't do
was
that.
that
You should just accept that. That's probably what is going on.
No, I'm gonna keep going.
It's a
My counter
crazy
argument
hill to
is
die
that
on for a fictional character.
despite there being a large difference in their age, I was telling Brian that we also have to take into consideration that when this would have transpired, it was like 1926. So
Different time.
Super early 20th century.
When power
And I'm not saying
power
that it's right,
dynamics
I'm
were
just
still
saying that.
respected. Am I right, Chris?
I'm just saying that look, it was probably consensual. That's all I'm saying. But it still doesn't make it right.
Wait.
It doesn't make it right.
It was
not.
on Indiana
probably
Jones' part.
consensual. All I know is that woman has been through some shit. And Indiana Jones was at the start of it. And now I understand that the Temple of Doom, the prequel, the Temple of Doom is actually the sexual exploitations of Indiana Jones. That's the real Temple of Doom.
Based on Marion's reactions in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it seems like she's more upset with him for leaving than anything else. Like, not necessarily, them having a relationship, but she's more aggravated the fact that he left.
But he didn't stick around
didn't
after
come back
banging a
for 10
15-year-old.
years.
Yeah, I'd be pissed too. Do you think she'd be as upset if he didn't have sex with her when she was 15? Probably not. He deserved that punch.
No comment
That's
on
what
that.
we're saying. You're right, Chris. It was a different time.
In 2020, that would not fly. 2021, unacceptable. Cancel Indiana Jones, but in the early 20th century.
Preserve the history. Like Indy would have wanted.
Exactly. It belongs in a museum.
So what's the themes of this movie? What are we on? What is sorry, that shot really dynamically changed my cadence. Themes, Chris, what's this movie about?
This isn't an exceptionally deep film. It's mostly focused on the adventure. However, if there is any type of takeaway, I would say Indiana Jones learns to be a more selfless individual by the end of it, whereas he starts at the beginning of the film as a very selfish person. You know, he's in it to find these treasures for himself. Really, he isn't above sacrificing somebody else to get what he wants, but by the end, he's willing to sacrifice the entire ark to protect Marion. So I think in the most shallow of terms, that's probably one theme you could glean from this movie. But the movie's not focused on telling us any type of deep messaging. It's focused on the adventure. That's its primary objective.
Which is interesting because they build up the arc as this, you know, this is the real find Indy that actually has ties to like something bigger, something not understood by the history of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then it's just filled with like Death Ghost.
It's like full of ghosts.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. It's kind of like nonsensical and silly. That element for sure, with all the potential there.
Silly because they built, you know, and I talked about this on the weekly upload about like, you know, I grew up in the church, and it's also why I find it funny that my dad like loves this movie. They take the Ark of the Covenant and they tie it to like, you know, real history and supernatural elements, and there's something to the Ark of the Covenant which they say in the film, like even just taking it to the context of the film. This contains the tablets that God personally inscribed on.
Right,
and is,
the Ten Commandments.
And is rooted in the exodus of the Jews from their slavery in Egypt. And it's like, yes, there's lots of weight there. And then there's just fucking ghost. It's just ghost.
I think
that
they
melt
say
people's
that
faces.
This is a stretch. But like
they carry it around as a weapon. Like the idea is that they carry it around and they open it.
I'm trying
and
to
they
think about
dive into
how-
a hole and let it like kill everybody. And then they're like, okay, put the.
I'm
lid
trying
on
to
it.
think about how I'm going to phrase this. So multiple times over the course of the film, they mention that the Ark is like a radio to God, like a means of communication to
God's
God.
pissed.
So and they never explicitly state this in the film, but inside the Ark, could we not say that like maybe it's the voice of God, and that's what leads to the death of anybody looking at it or hearing it or anything like that?
And yeah,
I'm stretching here. Like I said, it's never stated in those terms. But
if we want to give them more than is explicitly stated, you know, it's like they're opening it with bad intentions and obviously maybe aren't worthy of whatever the thing could potentially be. But yeah, obviously they don't really do a lot of work to explain what exactly is happening. I think in some of the critiques I was reading about it, it compares it to, which I think is a different story, of the characters being told not to look back or they turn to pillars of salt.
That is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
So they're tying in something there too with not looking at this thing and maybe just, you know, almost humans not being able to fully experience what God is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did like the. I will say something I liked about the concept of it all was the U.S. government taking possession of something they don't understand, stowing it away in a giant locker full of
and they've
other
just
shit.
got millions of
like ancient
maybe it's other
artifacts,
arcs, you know?
Yeah, of shit. You know, that was I kind of really love the ending, and it kind of saves it from a conceptual standpoint of Indy being pissed that has been like taken. I think that's all very genius. But Brian, did you glean anything else theme wise from this picture?
I think on that note, so first of all, the idea that the Nazis were interested in the occult.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how widely known that was at the time, but that is something that's accurate and definitely was interesting to be included here. But like you said, so it kind of ties together things like the Smithsonian with government intelligence and shows how searching for historical artifacts, there could be overlap between not necessarily military interest, but national security interest and historical artifacts, depending on what they are and what they could potentially do. So I thought it was just really cool to tie all that in, even though it's really a handful of scenes where that stuff's actually happening and we're really flying along the action of it. But yeah, I think there is a decent bit there. Aside from that, yeah, Marion's character is very much damsel in distress, given very little to do herself for the most part outside of her introduction. And yeah, the whole thing about teacher, he's clearly kind of flustered, if not blatantly attracted to his students. And we know that he's slept with a 15-year-old. So it's a very weird thing to have him be the main character, to have us know those things, and still him be kind of like, within the context of the movie, a charming guy in some ways. So all of that is very muddled and weird at best, I think.
Weird. It's a different time, Brian.
This movie's about colonialism, man. It's about a white guy going into other countries and taking shit that he didn't own. It's like,
wait a second. You can't do that to me. I'm an American. It's self-aware of it, too.
I re-listened to that line 3 times when she's captured, and she goes, "You can't do that to me. I'm an American." And I was like, yeah, that feels like this so whole real. Movie. Yeah, I mean, he's going to native villages, which, by the way,
Christian, I'm so glad you brought it up in this context. That's so perfect.
Sidebar is that, like, it's clearly shot in Hawaii. Like, I was like, oh, they literally shot the Galimima scene, like, exactly in the same spot of when he's like, I like this tree. And I was like, yeah, you used that tree again, man. You were back, you flew back to Hawaii to film your...
Are you talking about the opening sequence?
The opening sequence. That was filmed in Hawaii, right?
I'm not sure. I'm
almost certain it had to have been. I mean, it's if not, it's very, very similar scenery, but I've seen a lot of films. Chris, fact check me on that. But it was like literally the same valley that I'm pretty sure that they shot Jurassic Park scenes in. If not, then wow, they found something very, very similar. It is this, I think maybe this is why like it rubbed me the wrong way, but you know, especially with films like Black Panther, it brings up a lot of problems of like institutions going into cultures that they do not have any ownership of, and taking culture away and stealing it for their own. Like literally the people, the natives worship this thing as like a god, and they're really like, yeah, it's ours now, later. It's like so fucked up. So the kind of concept
as an obstacle to conquer.
Yeah, the concept of it, of like, we must like retain history by stealing it from other people. Yeah, I don't know if it's definitely a different time.
By the way, Christian, you were right. It was filmed in Kauai.
Thank you. Yeah,
nailed it.
Got an eye for these things. So does Spielberg. I mean, it's a great looking valley that they're shooting it in. Yeah, I mean, even they were shooting what was it, the last Jurassic Park that was in theaters, and I'm like, yeah, you're still in Hawaii. It looks great. It's great. It's a great shot. No, I just like that part just feels so dated and not self-aware at all of what it means, right? And I think it's important reminder to artists to like remember, like even when you're making fun fare, like what is happening. And we can look at it back then and be like, well, it's harmless for the time, but no, I mean, it's kind of like ignoring. And then to have something like the Ark of the Covenant, like being somewhat personal with old, you know, Jewish or Christian faith, it's like, well, it's not really what the Ark Covenant means. So it just feels kind of like appropriatory. It feels just kind of like taking things that are rooted in humanity and not really thinking about what the context of them are, right? It looks like you think about the Golden Idol is supposed to take place in Peru, I think, right? Which we can sub for Hawaii, sure. Who gives a shit? Right, but Peru's a very different place than Hawaii. But I understand from logistical reasons. I'm not mad at it for that. But there's a level of like, they're taking a golden idol, and the film doesn't explore what that meant to the people or what that is. And that to me feels like, yeah, that is the other time. That is the things that for me, I'm like, well, that's interesting. Like, why is that piece important? And why aren't we talking about it more? Maybe I'm too Gen Z, Chris. I don't know. But I feel like it feels weird.
No, I appreciate you bringing this context,
I think you're right. You know, in the modern era, these things are inappropriate. You know, like it's very presumptuous of us as Americans to go, look at this really cool and interesting piece of historical, or look at this really cool historical artifact. Look at its significance. Why leave it there when we can study it here in America? You know, like, why leave it to the people that are deserving of it when we can steal it from them?
Yeah.
It's inappropriate.
Well, it's also like not talking about it It's the golden idol is cool because it's gold, and you have these fucking stupid ass traps that make no sense, by the way, in mechanics. That also bother me for watching it through 2021 eyes. Of like, yeah, no, like there's a cool way to tell tales of ancient traps, but like, I don't know, weighted pressure plates in the dart shooting. I'm like, those the springs would be rusted from the like, it just doesn't make any sense. And then also, we're not talking about what the actual artifact is, and I think that's important. If
this is, I'm sorry, I'm gonna sound like an old person right now. This is what concerns me about the way the next generation is going to consume film. Is that they will not take into consideration... They're going to ask
too many questions.
No, not that. They're not going to take into consideration the context of, A, when these movies were made, 1981, and B, when they take place, 1936. So you can't go into these pictures with solely contemporary eyes. You have to take the context into consideration to get what the movie is trying to do, you know, trying to replicate serials of the 1930s.
Right.
You know, so everything that you're nitpicking and complaining about is valid if we're dissecting it through the eyes of, you know, someone who's currently alive in 2021. But I think the critique is misplaced, maybe, if that makes sense.
This film is designed just to entertain, right? It's meant for a mass audience. And we're critiquing not only the film, but what the film represents, especially with a film as vapid as this, where there's not a whole lot. The only thing to grasp onto is what is the culture thinking about? And it's literally like part of, I don't want to say quote unquote, the problem. And I'm sorry, listeners, if you're like, wow, this podcast got too woke for me. But let's talk about like reflecting on what the culture is like, no, this is just vapid entertainment. You're talking about vapid entertainment that like people are digesting as like, yeah, I'm just having fun, stealing shit from other cultures and throwing it in the fucking museum. Like, it is indicative of like what you think of vapid fun to be, which is like not appreciating and othering culture. This film is about a historian who, and in watching the vapid material of just having fun, having wacky adventures. It's literally just
a historian who's like,
fucking
these objects don't belong with the people who made them, but instead belong in an American museum.
Right. And that's something to talk about, and not to like discredit the creators of like understanding what audiences like. Like, that's part of being an artist and making fun popcorn entertainment. I'm not like actually condemning the artist. I'm just pointing out the reflective nature of the culture of 1981 and what we're like okay with. Whereas like, no, I don't think this shit flies in 2021. Like, that, you can't make this type of vapid entertainment. And if you do, like, it's got to like actually talk about these things. And that's why I don't think it's a timeless film. Like, I think it really is not problematic in the sense of like, oh yeah, we should condemn it. These filmmakers, Spielberg, like, what, how awful. No, but let's like think about, and like the most interesting things to me are to talk about like what is just hootenanny gunfire and American good fun, and like what's actually problematic about the time that it came out.
It's crazy to me. It's crazy to me that you don't think Raiders of the Lost Ark is a timeless film. I think it's a timeless. Look, I'm gonna straight up say it right now, and this
in my button-up shirt.
I wish it's not coming out. This is the only way I can think to say it. This is a timeless piece of American cinema.
Sure, yeah.
And I use the term American specifically because I have to.
We rob graves,
you know.
What else?
It does things that maybe aren't politically correct in the current era, but this is a very important piece of Americana and film history. And
I'm not gonna debate that. I'm not like
I'm just gonna say right now, Hollywood, California, pumps out some of the best movies in the entire world. Like, we have a cinema system that is distinctly unique and different from the way the rest of the world makes movies.
Logistics.
And this is, I think, representative of some of those early
the
classics.
Military funds a significant portion of them.
Now they do. I think there's a distinct division as far as like when that starts to take place. I think Michael Bay has contributed too much to that taking
Which
place.
I think is like why, if this movie came out, I don't think critically it would do very well. And that to me argues against the timeless nature, because
I agree with
it
you.
is so
I agree with you
depth.
completely.
And this is what, and I'm not going to get in a blockbuster, like great blockbuster, great movie debate with you. I will say it's a piece of cinema history, 100%. We'll agree baseline on that. And as a term of logistics, like a lot of talent, a lot of execution that's done really well. What I'll say is that, like, it is indicative of just like straight up like ignorance about things that are now important and should be important and we're happy are important, that just were not on the radar of anything. And this movie should be about so much like it.
But I don't think the film should be penalized for it because it came out during a different time.
Penalizing for it. I have gone on record and said I love this film as a kid. I love this movie. It's a lot of fun. What I'm saying is that if there's anything to talk about, it is the reflexive nature of looking at a movie from 1981 that's just like, we're just having fun. No, it's about nothing. When it is, in fact, in its creation, in its entity, about a lot of problems with that, like just general American culture.
And this ties into, I can't remember when we talked about it on the show, but just the idea of the cowboy, right? Indiana Jones is kind of a cowboy. Like, he just views the entire world as his wild, wild west in a problematic way, right? And he's not really noble. He's not a noble fighter. He will just shoot someone. He'll kick someone in the testicles if he has to. So I think it is worthwhile to look at it from that context, Christian, and things that largely go uncritically analyzed in the culture, for sure.
Yeah, no, we're successfully canceling Indiana Jones, Chris, and I'm sorry it's offending you so much.
He's still canceled. He's still canceled.
I don't want to. I want to clarify what I'm saying, and that is, I too agree with you that it's important to talk about these things, and I think it's justified to recognize that there are problematic elements of this film. But what I'm saying is, I don't agree with, again, and I know you've gone on record, Christian, saying you're not condemning this movie, but I don't think this next generation is, old man alert again. I don't know if they're capable of doing that.
That's what I'm saying.
No, I don't know if they're capable of doing that. I don't know if they're capable of going, there's some problematic elements of this film, but it's still a good movie based on the context of the time in which it came out and what it contributed to cinema.
Right.
I think cancel culture right now, and while I agree that there are a lot of
the word cancel culture. Oh no,
I know.
No,
I'm saying
what
it. I don't care. Everything that has happened within cancel culture is for the best and for the betterment of us as a society. You know, we are learning to change ourselves and shift society in a way that makes us all better people and more understanding people and more accepting people. But I think when it comes to art, that's a different conversation. I think if something was made 40 years ago, you can't judge it based on with contemporary eyes. You can recognize the problems that it has, but I don't think it should be at fault for those things because it was made during a different time. Does that make sense? And I think that's a level of critique that I think is lost nowadays. Like, I can look at Ghostbusters and I can say that movie is super fucking problematic. Like, Peter Venkman is not a good person. You know, he talks about drugging Dana in that movie. And yet Ghostbusters is a seminal piece of comedic work in American cinema, you know, and it should be acknowledged as such. But that's just my personal opinion. But I think there's an important distinction to be made here, in that you should be able to recognize the problematic elements of film, but it shouldn't reflect poorly on something that came out during a different time.
No, but I hope I've been clear about this. I think the difference is people getting to what upsets probably us, especially as older people in this time, is like when people are personally the spotlight of what the problem is. When it's like, again, recognizing the product at the time, recognizing that like probably the people that have changed things, the people that have realized this and spoken out about it, right? And celebrating those people, but not necessarily villainizing like Spielberg or Lucas, right? It's not about that. It is about saying like, hey, it would have been cool if they were aware of this stuff, right? But not demonizing them as humans. It's like, the quote unquote evil people. I don't think that's what me and Brian or myself more so are speaking of. It's just like, it is kind of this thing that should seem more obvious, and definitely something that when artists are putting work into stuff, they should be aware of. And
I wholeheartedly agree with you for any piece of media that has come out since 2019.
But
wholeheartedly agree with
but you can look, I think we've looked at, we had a whole month on Spike Lee, and you're like, oh, that dude was ahead of the public consciousness, and that dude, you know what I mean? So I think there's room to celebrate when artists are like aware of these things that do matter to people. There are people that when Indiana Jones came out that saw this movie and had problems with this stuff. And I think saying that just because they weren't in the majority of the thought, brigade of what popular conscious was, see that their opinion,
the vocal majority,
we're just becoming more aware. And I think that in contextualizing these works, you do need to do that. It's like Huckleberry Finn. It's like when people, like every few years, it seems like there's a revolt against Huckleberry Finn for whatever. But it's like, that is so important for what
the next generation of children rediscover it, and then
and it's
make it their crusade.
And it's like, it's important, but like the conversation about
it's already been done, kids.
Yeah. Well, I use that as like because that's something very popular, at least when we studied in high school. I don't know if they're still still reading Huckleberry Finn, but like, it's important to understand, like, part of that conversation about talking about Huckleberry Finn is like the context of it. It's like, oh no, it was actually woke for its generation, quote unquote. Even though we'd read it and go like, well, you wouldn't make that today. It's still,
this is unacceptable.
And again, I think Indiana Jones is not in the same league of what it's talking about, but I think it's the same way of looking at it, where it's like, yeah, when we talk about Huckleberry Finn, there's a conversation about the time and place, and I think this is kind of in the same thing of like something that's so blind, it has horse blinders on to so much other stuff that I think is important to bring up when talking about it. And to be honest, the only thing that could fill time when we're talking about the themes of this fucking movie.
Controversy. Boom.
We did.
So let's move on. Just lighter conversation, because I want to celebrate the good things. Chris, don't worry. We don't have the power to cancel shit, so don't worry about it, man. We're not canceling this movie. Let's talk about the cool...
Don't doubt Brian's capabilities.
Hey, we can get Indiana Jones canceled without getting his movies canceled. You know what I mean? It's a balance. Don't fuck 15-year-olds. So let's talk about our favorite moments in this film. Brian, start with you, buddy.
All right. So the first time we hear the theme, Indiana Jones is running. He's got the artifact. He's running through the woods. He does a straight up Tarzan swing, and the theme comes in, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is an adventure. This is what I'm here for. This is the movies. And yeah, that's the moment. I brought it up earlier, but it's just like, I think Spielberg's undeniably genius, but John Williams maybe can never be overvalued. It's just it's ridiculous how much
he
can
enhances Spielberg's vision.
Ridiculously, undeniably. So that from the beginning.
The start the plane bit is just like, it's like there's no words for it. It's so you just see it, like me seeing it again. I'm like, this is like the idea of filmmaking and making an action scene that has tension with him fishing on the side. It's like, that's just like perfect filmmaking. Him running over the edge and being like, start the plane, and the guy not paying attention. I'm just like, it seems
you can't hear it well. He's fishing.
It's so tropey that it kind of feels silly. And I'm curious what modern audiences like would think that it's just too on the nose. But like, it is like Spielberg, as we've seen throughout this entire month, just boils down things to its essentials and accentuates the essentials right on the mark. The beats of everything are so good, and I think you're picking out a moment that like exemplifies that very well.
And I don't know, I'm always tying things to other movies, but I realized this time around, and I haven't seen Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls in 15 years,
homage.
But this moment is clearly right. Okay, clear
100%.
homage to this moment.
Yeah. Definitely.
So the introduction to Marion, my God, we see her in the bar, obviously, And also, so that whole moment, we kind of talked about it already. When Indy shows up in the bar and we see his shadow, and that's all
excellent
we need.
Framing.
Oh my God. And just shadows throughout the whole thing. So his introduction there, the introduction of Marion, but just shadows being used throughout the whole movie. I had this thought while watching that he was almost doing like live hieroglyphics or something, where we see characters on the wall moving sometimes. And it's just brilliant. It's just so perfectly framed, all of it. Marion in the turret, just being a total badass. Like it's her one moment of like real power in the movie outside once we were caught up in the plot. And it's just excellent. And it builds up to what I think is maybe the most tense moment of the movie, where Indy hops up on the plane. She's stuck in the cockpit, and in the background we see the oil start catching fire and start coming towards it.
So good.
And then we pull out, and it's just effortlessly done. They run away, we get an explosion, and it's everything I love about action movies and being swept up in the tension and the scene itself. It's great.
So popular that they try to recreate it in the stage show, or the stunt show, I guess, in Hollywood studios.
Right, exactly. The last thing, silly self-aware quip where they ask Indy what the plan is, and he says, "I don't know, I'm making it up as I go." And I'm just like, exactly, this movie.
It feels like the plot of the movie.
Yeah,
very
yes, right. It's so self-aware. So yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Oh, good call-outs. Chris?
No, a lot of those are my favorites as well. Like I said, I think the opening sequence of this film is perfect. I've been using perfect a lot lately, but like genuinely, up until we have the anaconda in the plane, and Indy tells us for the first time that he's afraid of snakes. Like once we have that last tidbit, like we know everything moving forward about Indiana Jones that we'll need to know. You know, so I agree with you, Brian. It's an excellent opening sequence. And then the sequence where he's fighting off all the Nazis as the plane's like moving around always cracks me up, like you mentioned, especially when it's like time for like muscular Nazi boss B, who's like,
he just walks out,
waddles his
takes
way out
off
onto
his
the
shirt,
tarmac,
and he's just like, my job is to beat off.
You've defeated all these regular size Nazis. Can you handle Nazi 2.0? It just makes me laugh.
It's very classic, yeah. And a scene that like engraved in my memory as watching as a kid. Like that's like one of the ones that the scene with the plane circling around, like with the big Nazi, is like, as a child, that just sticks out so well because it's so easy to understand. It's David and Goliath, you know? And Indy gets his ass whooped. Like he is not capable of fighting this person. He has to throw sand in his eyes, and that's very well done.
You know, what I noticed this time around is like how important the character of Indiana Jones is to some contemporary characters that we have now in Hollywood. Like
Chris Pratt.
Yes. Nope, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to start by saying Nicolas Cage, National Treasure. My wife recently introduced me to those films, and he's essentially a contemporary Indiana Jones. But even more so, you're 100% right, Christian. The way that Star-Lord has been written in Guardians of the Galaxy, he is a spacefaring Indiana Jones. He is bumbling. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a treasure hunter, and he's an outlaw. And that's essentially what Indiana Jones is, except taking place in the 1940s. So, yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
That's okay. No worries. But yeah. He's just hugely important to like some characters that we currently have in cinema. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the element of, you point out a really great element, I think, of this film, which is like Indiana Jones isn't like a perfect person. Like he's very humanized as like just an everyman that's also a little sexy. It's also a little adventurous and also knows his way around a whip. And it's like fun. It's just like everything about it is just like fun, average man that also gets himself into extraordinary circumstances, which I think is like a really great formula that clearly this defined and made it work. I love, I always remember the plane scene. That was always what stuck out in my head when I was a kid. But the car chase, that to me is the most impressive one, where there's like when he's like hanging off the front of the car, and then he's like skirting behind it while the car's driving.
It's an impressive stunt.
Oh yeah,
the one where his balls are right next to the wheel. That one just like irked me real bad. I was like, anything against the jewels involved.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, I've been in some situations with wheels and my balls, so I feel like,
oh my.
Oh man, I'm disappointed in myself. So I really like that scene. That sticks out really good to me. I love Alfred Molina in this movie. It's really fun to see him in the opening role. I don't love the set pieces behind that. Like even the stone one. Did you guys watch the stone falling? And maybe it's from seeing the Universal thing where I think it's a little more dramatic. It's like there's not a lot of that in the movie. Like that's what you think of when you think of the opening of Indiana Jones. I'm like, the stone is falling for like 5 seconds.
Oh, the big boulder.
The big boulder. Yeah. That's it. That's like the Indiana Jones in my head. And I watched it. I'm like, that scene takes 5 seconds. The boulder's behind him.
Pretty quick.
And he jumps out.
But it's also a scene that they led with in most of the advertising.
Yeah, I didn't.
That's probably why it sticks out as like this big indie moment. Because the marketing really focused on that opening
I think
sequence.
Mostly in my head, maybe it's the marketing of the like Universal thing.
You mean the Hollywood Studios stunt show?
Yeah. I think that's like the big moment there. And it's like a bigger moment in that show. And maybe that's why. But I remember watching it and I was like, that boulder weighs like a pound. That's not like that impressive a shot now, but it's so iconic. I'd say those are my favorite. I do have like, in transitioning to, I guess more final thoughts here, is, I just kind of disappointed by the Ark scene. It's like really impressive, like the melting of the faces, which by the way is horrifying. I can't believe my dad let me watch that, and it is very well done.
Yeah,
it looks really good. It's like the ghost at the end of the Ark don't make any sense. Like you've contextualized it a little bit more, and I think from a visual element it is a really great moment, and certainly one that stands out, especially from when I saw it when I was younger. But like at the end of the day, it's just like a bunch of angry ghosts that like literally just clean up our characters. And I think one of the stronger contentious relationships is Indy with Rene Belloq, right? That's the character's name, played by Paul Freeman.
Belloq, yeah.
It's like a really great relationship that they have going throughout. I love it, where every time he's like, Indy, I'm one step ahead of you, and you just hate him so much because you're like, you did none of the work. Indy did all the work, and you did nothing, and you're taking credit for it. It's really built up to make you hate him quite a bit, and he's also very charming. He's a very good opposite Indiana Jones. I think underappreciated historically in Indiana Jones. But his like comeuppance are, I don't know. It just didn't feel like it added too much, and I'm left kind of disappointed. What are your thoughts on that final scene?
I want to say, before we get to the final scene, his moment where he kind of makes the argument to Indy that like, you're not morally pure. You're just, he's kind of giving him that Joker argument. Like, you're just one day away from working for the Nazis, just like I am, kind of thing.
I don't think he's wrong.
I don't think he is either. I think that's a really solid scene, but I don't know. I was never super sympathetic for this guy, because he is just kind of like the bully who similarly was interested in our female protagonist, but at least she was of age at that point. It's like I can't fault him for that.
Always harping on that little tidbit of information.
It's a low bar.
Well, like honestly, why is he bad? Like, I do think you bring up a good argument, and Chris, I'm so sorry that we're retreading this territory, but like, he's bad because he's working for the Nazis, and he takes it away from Indy when it's not even Indiana Jones. Like, he worked a little harder to do it, but he did not, like, he doesn't own it. So like, we're mad because Indiana Jones like went through the traps that people put there for a reason. Like, the people put the traps there for a reason, because they were like, we don't want any fucking white guy stealing our shit, right? So like, we're mad at him because he didn't do any of the work for it. But again, it's not really Indiana Jones either. But all of it's really well done, and I'm just like disappointed by the end of the arc, because I do think it's like the most potent relationship that has the most like weight besides his with Marion, like Indiana Jones with Marion, obviously. But I really feel like him just looking at the what he has gotten ahead of Indy and dying, it's like it makes sense. It's not like it fails on every thematic level, but just the
they also have like a back and forth. Like Indy's the one that invaded their excavation,
right?
You know, so they had already done a lot of the digging.
Sure,
he just knew the right spot. So there's a back and forth.
Another completely ridiculous moment where they start digging on their site and only are found out like 12 hours, 15 hours later. Just completely preposterous. But now I'm thinking of thematically, there could be some like World War II, like, so obviously the atomic bomb wasn't dropped on Germany, but some maybe atomic bomb type of stuff happening with the Nazis being killed with this kind of thing happening at the end. I don't know. Some
maybe.
World War II stuff happening maybe, but
well, it does like
that would have taken place a couple years later.
using some
right.
control the video game like terminology. Like the Ark is a what you'd call like an item of power. You know, it's like just this
a MacGuffin
for destruction or whatever the plot needs, I guess, at the time. I also want to shout out the actor who plays the Nazi dude that shows up in the bar and gets the burn on his hand. He's so comically good. And he's like, I don't think that you would understand the pain. Like, he's really in it. Like, he's like so committed. I love that about his character.
So would you be, do you think Kiefer Sutherland would bring a better performance to this role?
No.
Kiefer couldn't do it.
No.
Okay.
No,
all right.
I don't think so.
Lockdown.
They're basically the same person.
No, he's very
similar.
I kin him to what's his face? The character actor who's in Tarantino films and is in the aforementioned Alita Battle Angel. The German actor.
Christoph Waltz?
Christoph Waltz, for sure. Yeah, Christoph Waltz would have crushed this role.
Oh, that's a good shout. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, he has that whole scene in Inglourious Bastards at the very beginning, which is very much like this Nazi interrogator, which is what this character also is.
For sure. Definitely why I choose him.
And just another piece of brilliant storytelling, him burning his hand and getting the one side when it's double-sided. Just really
yeah, it's cool.
Excellent stuff.
Oh, visually, like, this movie's aces. This movie's, like, definitely firing. It's like it's George Lucas's like adventure idea with Spielberg behind the camera, and seeing the behind the scenes. It's so awesome to see. You know, on a side note, it's so awesome to see Spielberg, just a young, hungry filmmaker. He's like, "Can I get up there with the camera? Yeah, let's do that." And just making decisions like. That's like the key element of him executing as a director. It's just like, yeah, let's make this decision. No, this will work this way. No, we should shoot it here because we want to give the audience geography of what's going on. Like just his confidence and just behind the camera. It's like it's very, very attractive quality about him as an artist. It's just like him being able to get in there, make the decision, you know, communicate with all the staff and just make it happen. Like that's very it's very cool. It's one of the
and I totally agree, Christian. Him talking about, because I think this was one of the first movies he was a producer as well as directing, and I think it was the making of documentary. It was either the making of or the one about stunts that they did as well, kind of simultaneously. But you see the guy who did the stunt, who I think he was the stunt coordinator, who did the car tipping when the one truck flips over, and Spielberg basically is telling him that, like, no, it looks great, like having to convince him to not want to do another one because the stunt guy's like, oh no, it could have been better, and Spielberg's like, no, this looks realistic, people are going to totally get it, and it looks real. And it was just like, okay, so he's like wearing all of these hats, and he's also trying to save money by not having to redo the shot, but it does end up working well. And like you said, he's just he's confident, and he has
knowing when he has it and being like, yeah, it'll work. Yeah, it's so
he knows when to and when not to send an orangutan down a ramp with roller skates.
Might take him 5 minutes.
Might take him
5 minutes. He's like, we knew after
at
the
least
18th
give him a
take
quick 5
that it wouldn't work. All right, and just kind of like wrapping things up because I know we're running long, and I think we've covered most of the stuff. But did anybody have any thoughts on comparisons between Jaws and Close Encounters? I'm not sure I have anything particularly profound to say about that. No. Okay.
No, like I said, there's still a consistent through line with all these films that we've been watching. with Steven Spielberg and being able to create the sense of adventure, regardless of the adventure is spoon-fed to us in varying degrees. I think Indiana Jones being the most adventurous film compared to the other two films that we watched. But there's this like whimsical, childlike adventure nature to all these movies that I really appreciate and enjoy.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this one is both Jaws and Close Encounters we kind of described as having a horror section, having an action section, adventure section. This movie very much is adventure action from the start and leans even more so into, because of what it's homaging, tropes. It's like every character is kind of over the top, large. Indiana Jones has some nuance, but ultimately he's kind of a straightforward character. Like you said, we had a few minutes with him without any dialogue and pretty much know everything we need to know about what sort of character he is. And because of that, I think it is just ultimately much more surface level than the other two. But I think it's on some level by design because of what they're homaging, playing within the tropes that that pre-exist within those serialized formats.
Right, and how many like vapid pieces of entertainment are we not talking about from this era, right? We're talking about this one for a very specific reason, because it is executed on the highest degree that it could have been executed on for the time. So I think that it should be commended for that. I do think it's not really that great of a movie in the history of movies. I think that it is great for its time. But I'd be interested. I'm excited to have kids and show them this, and maybe they'll love it as much as I did. We'll see. Wouldn't bet on them. They're going to be like, Dad, I think that it's absolutely problematic that this man is going into other cultures and stealing their artifacts because it doesn't belong to him. So why does he feel like he has the right to take them? And I'll be like, kids.
It's very astute of you for a 3-year-old to recognize
also,
that. What are they teaching you in pre-kindergarten?
Also, when I saw that guy's face get melted off, that gave me nightmares for 3 weeks. You're a bad father. Yes, son. Yes, son. You're correct. Wise beyond your years. You Scooter. Champ.
Your son's name is going to be Scooter?
No, it's his nickname.
Okay.
His name is Riot.
Oh, I love Riot.
Oh no, my girlfriend literally wants to name our son the same name as our dog.
After the dog?
No, not after the dog.
Just like Indiana Jones. Indiana was named after the dog.
That is going to do it for Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm going to try to watch the Last Crusade before next episode because I am very interested in if I'm going to have like the same issues from terms of like story writing and stuff. What are your memories of Last Crusade, Chris?
I think that it's probably a less problematic movie.
Not even in terms of problematic, just in terms of like overall like execution stuff.
It's the second best Indiana Jones movie.
Oh, next to Raiders. Okay,
yeah.
All right. Yeah,
I would put Raiders on top, and then Last Crusade, Temple of Doom, and then the one that shall not be named.
Fair enough.
I might try and watch this as well.
Hey, I'll have to do a little, maybe a bonus ep is in the works. All right.
I'd rewatch it.
So that'll do it for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Gentlemen, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Loyal listeners, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Conkling, talking about all things nerdy, comic books, television, movies, video games, collectibles, you name it, I'm talking about it.
And you can find me at True Pop-O-Holic, talking a whole bunch of shit.
You can find my band at Midnight Satire.
Canceling Indiana Jones.
He's done for. Stands no chance.
You can find my musical project, Midnight Satire, on Twitter, streaming platforms, music. Tell me what you think about that. Exciting. What are we talking about next week, Chris?
Christian, next week, we're closing out our Springing into Spielberg Summer Part 1 month with Empire of the Sun, which is a movie that I have not seen. I don't think Brian's seen it either.
It'll be a
right? Have you
first
seen it, Christian?
viewing for all of us.
This will be great. Yeah.
It's going to be really cool.
Baby Christian Bale.
Yes.
Ooh, little baby Christian Bale. So cute, Christian Bale.
Baby Bale.
Oh, I'm going to be Batman one day. I've seen.
I like that both of us
Where were
went
the
for
other sons
Batman
going?
jokes.
I've seen. Oh, we can do a Newsies, I guess. We can do a reference to that. Yeah, let's do a Terminator Salvation reference. That's really gonna crush with the Gen Zers. No, I've seen a clip from because I've watched I guess I watched a documentary on Spielberg or something. I watched something.
There was an HBO documentary a couple years ago.
Yeah. You know, for sure. Yeah. No, that's exactly what it was. And there was clips from Empire of the Sun. I was like, this looks like a masterpiece. It looks great. So, really impressive stuff. So, that'll be really exciting. Follow us on all the social medias. If you've enjoyed this episode, rate us 5 stars. Let us know if you think Indiana Jones should, in fact, be canceled. If you have any recommendations for brands of liquor that me and Brian should be taking shots of. Brian looks like he's about to fall asleep. This is very late, and I made him take a shot of booze. So, he's feeling it. I'm feeling it too, and I'm feeling the time to go to sleep myself. But listeners, please follow us again. Subscribe on YouTube. Email us, Pop-O-Holics@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts, questions, concerns. We'd love to hear from you. That'll do it for this episode. We look forward to seeing you next week on...